Evo, dobar dan svima. Ipak predlažem da započnemo. Današnji dan planeta Zemlje nije slučajno izabran za naše gostujuće izlaganje, jer kao što znadete, taj dan ima simboličko značenje, to je početak novog ciklusa, ali i početak intenzivnijeg razdoblja naših terenskih istraživanja, a intencija ovog današnjeg susreta jest da vas zainteresiramo i za neke druge oblike istraživanja koji nisu strogo etnografski i koji su zapravo rezultat prije svega umjetničkog procesa, umjetničkog senzibiliteta i ove sposobnosti da se nevidljive stvari učini vidljivima, a da se skrivene prikažu kao, dakle, zanimljive i razumljivije širem krugu gledatelja ili čitatelja. No, ja ipak prije svega u Norrisovom, nisam ni predstavila, naš gost je dakle Andrew Norris, u njegovoj toj metodi bilježena i svagdana i blagdana u jednom jedinom hrvatskom selu vidim više sličnosti nego razlika sa našom etnografskom metodom i rekla bih da je riječ o jednom hibridnom i etnografskom i dokumentarnom i umjetničkom procesu koji nalikuje na one metode koje mi nazivamo stručno metodom dubokog slušanja ili šetalačkom metodom ili participativnom etnografijom, gdje istraživač itekako aktivno sudjeluje u društvenom životu zajednice. Poslije izlaganja iz samog filma koji ćemo vidjeti, voljela bih da dakle, više razgovaramo i toj samoj metodi koja je više manje intuitivna, ali ju je tijekom godina naš gost itekako razvio i ona je zapravo rezultirala sa 300 filmova koje možemo nazivati dokumentarnim ili etnografskim, s tim da ih je naš današnji gost sam i snimio i montirao, a za većinu njih je i skladao glazbu. S obzirom da će samo izlaganje Andrew Norrisa biti na engleskom, ja ću ga onda i predstaviti na engleskom i prepustiti mu riječ. So, my guest, Andrew Norris, is an English painter and documentary filmmaker. He first came to Croatia during the war in 1992 with intention to paint damaged culture monuments. After graduating from London School of Slavonic and East European Studies, he returned to Zagreb, and he, as a painter, exhibited in several famous venues like National Gallery, Tate Britain, Victoria and Albert Museum. And just as he once divided his artistic time between London and Dorset, these days he divides his time between studios in Zagreb and Gornje Bukovlje. Gornje Bukovlje is a village above Breznica in Karlovac region, and it actually initiated all this art project. We will hear about something about them. And among several exhibitions, the last one was just opened in Lauba. The name of exhibition is Labor of the Field. I have a little Deplianor brochure I will give to you to pass it on. And if you will, actually the exhibition will be closed in 2 days.
Thursday, yes.
Yes, on Thursday. And for those who will not be able to visit the exhibition, don't worry, because Andrew has 2 YouTube channels where you can look at most of his artistic work and those documentary films. So in this visually rich presentation, Andrew Norris will introduce his process of transforming a village, one village on Breznica River, into a series of art projects, community building events, and documentary films. We will also see how he himself, through his visual works on digital platforms, became a mediator of these still living traditions in the broader context of Croatian diaspora and the global practice of micro-archiving of dying, so to say, intangible heritage in Croatia. So welcome, Andrew, and I give you the floor.
Thank you very much for that introduction. Welcome, everybody. Nice to see more people than I expected. Okay. One of my favourite quotes comes from the English writer Thomas Hardy, and he said, "I believe it is better to know a little of the world very well than a lot of the world very little," and that's always been my philosophy wherever I have lived. 21 years ago, we bought this little run-down house in a small village near to the river Mrežnica. With the house, there was a piece of land that needed considerable work. And over the first few years, we got involved in fixing the place up. So I bought myself a little video camera in order to record the renovations. In the meantime, I was taking walks around the village, and being a foreign person, people were very curious about me as I was curious about them. So as I walked around, I would start filming them, and I would accost anybody I found on the street, on the road, or I would be invited in to visit people and sample some of the local wine. And so I would start filming and record their stories. I filmed their customs and their lifestyle, and the people I met were very friendly, and I developed trust from them. It got to the point that every part of my walk around the village, I could be reminded of a story I'd heard, and I could identify that particular part of the village, and increasingly these stories overlapped, so that my walks almost became one long narrative. One of the most profound comments I received came from a neighbour, was when he rebutted my statement that I thought everybody must have 100 stories, and he corrected me. He said, "There are not 100 stories. The whole village is just one story." After a while, I started putting on the odd film show in the school so that the village community could see what I was doing, and they approved. They rather liked seeing themselves up on the screen. The last video I made of this series, number 76, recorded a dear friend with his bees. When he died in 2017, I decided to draw the project to a close. A little while later, however, I thought that perhaps I should subject myself to the same treatment as I had subjected the villagers and turned the camera on myself. I then made a series of 64 weekly accounts of my involvement with our house, our piece of land, and the sculptural works that I was making and placing around in the meadow or in the woods around. This was it's called a mizmaze, and I made it out of straw and then burnt it. And it lasted for about 2 weeks, but in that time, a satellite flew over and recorded it for Bing Maps, and it survived for about 10 years before they updated the photographs and photographed the landscape in colour. This collection I imaginatively titled Village Stories from Bukovia. And when taken together, as Renata said, I've made almost 300 documentaries, including recording various what I call field songs. These are songs that the children particularly would, when they took their cattle to pasture, they would improvise a song, usually about love and loss and wanting certain things. And I collected a lot of these songs and added musical accompaniment to them. And you'll see an example or two in the film later. Sadly, I also filmed a number of in memoriams. Last year, after a gentle row down the river, I concluded that perhaps the time was right to call it a day. The village, as an institution, is undergoing great change, and while that might be something worth filming, I didn't want to preside over such change. Over all these years, the village has been my primary source of inspiration, not just for filming, but painting too, and I actually consider myself a painter rather than a documentary filmmaker. And that could even involve using trees as my canvas. Bukovia is named after the beech tree, which is predominant in the village, and luckily for me it has a rather smooth bark that I could then paint these words on. Then in 2017, I started painting the limestone karst that populates our end of the village and the adjacent wood. And these works I exhibited in 2020 here in Zagreb. The next project, because I like working on projects, involves my ongoing restoration and preservation of the last dew pond or mlaka in the village. With the loss of cattle, it was seen that these ponds were redundant and all bar one was filled in. This mlaka, this dew pond, is not only a reminder of the agrarian life in the village, but I also wanted to protect an authentic village sound, since we no longer hear the lowing of cows, and that was the sound of croaking frogs, music to my ears. In addition, this mlaka has inspired my painting for the past 3 years and has moved my artistic sensibility in a direction I could never have imagined previously. Some of these works were exhibited in 2024, but to date there are some 196 works. What I was particularly interested in exploring here was that notion of below the water, on the water, above the water, reflected in the water, and then at some points, plant life growing through the water. It's multidimensional. I was always curious as well just how strong the influence of the church was in the village. In my conversations with the people in Bukovlia, I heard many references to the Catholic calendar, when certain tasks were carried out or crops planted, but nowhere could I discern an earlier ideology that the church had supplanted. When I walk around parts of the landscape of Bukovlia, I feel it is almost primordial, that I am the first person to enter the woods. By contrast, in England, you cannot go anywhere without feeling a human presence and detecting traces of a pre-Christian origin. But I'm sure it exists here somewhere as an underlying subculture. And my latest project, called The Labour of the Field, which one can see in Laube until Thursday, narrows down the focus of my attention even further and concerns one man, the gentleman who built our house that we now occupy and whose land we tend. But who is this man? He is, as we would call him in England, every man. He is a teacher of agriculture. He is a man of the soil, a man of the woods, a lover of animals. And these are his tools. He is an archetypal character whose parallel appears in cultures all over the world. He is the green man from England. He is Basanyawan from the Basque country. He has a variety of names: Mokosh, Perun, Leshy. You might be familiar with some of them, but they all have one thing in common, in that they are all part of our ancestry. We all carry our ancestry within us. We are all living archives of our culture. Just like my neighbours in the village, and the older one becomes, the richer is that archive, and it would be prudent to take note. As a postscript, I would just like to add, I've grown accustomed to death. Most of the people, my friends in this video presentation I'm about to show you from 8 years ago have died. Personal feelings aside, I can't imagine what a loss to Croatian culture in particular that has happened in these years. I consider myself as extremely fortunate to have just caught the tail end of a fading culture and a dwindling community. Here you'll see the last man, probably in the Karlovac region, who still ploughed with horses. In England, people have a great sense of nostalgia for such a scene, yet here it was until recently, a living tradition. Let us not wait until we feel nostalgic for something we have lost to appreciate it and to record it. Many of you will perhaps be familiar with the sentiments expressed in this picture. A similar one appeared on Facebook a few years ago. In my experience of filming and interviewing the villagers of the little village of Bukovlia over the past 8 years or so, the key phrase for me is just ask. And that is exactly what I did. So where is Bukovlia and how did we end up there? Well, in all honesty, it could be in any village in any part of the country. It just so happened that the only advertisement for a weekend cottage that attracted my attention included the words Uz Mrežnicu, by the Mrežnica, a stunning river, very deep and slow-moving, and a joy to swim in the summer. And that is a clue to its location near Karlovac. Here is a map, but what this map will not show you are the local colloquial names given to various parts of the village. By these names, people and their houses are identified. It was a cold winter's day in 2004 when we first visited the house, and despite the lack of any foliage or colour anywhere, we saw that the house had potential and bought it. Soon after, I acquired a video camera to record the nature around us and the work we were doing on the land and house. As we became settled, we became acquainted with our immediate neighbours, the sort of characters one would probably find in any village. This map shows our end of the village. Our part is locally known as Dražice. And here are just a few of our neighbours. Baka Jela, who was the first person I filmed and who became the catalyst for my project. Bara, who was the first person to introduce me to a particular type of village singing. This is an example of the kind of song that people sang when they took their cattle to and from pasture. And then there is Mara, who would often sing for me and with whom I've recorded hundreds of hours of conversation. This is the Salad Woman. We gave her that name on account of the fact that while walking home from her field, she would often leave us produce from her garden. Then there is Mika, the only harmonica player at our end of the village. He plays with great enthusiasm even after he lost the tip of one of his fingers. If you look closely, you can just see that finger heavily wrapped in a bandage. Then behind us up on the hill, that part of the village is known as Tsari. Here live members of the extended Domšit family, Torna, Darko and Darko. And so the circle widens. Here we have the man known as Pošta, or postman, for indeed that is what he is. But he is so much more. He is the president of the fire service. He is a local councillor, and until recently the president of the women's cultural group, Bukvica. He is a solid and active figure in the village. To! By contrast, there is Stjepan, or Stef, who simply and quietly enjoys his retirement, proudly living as he does in the longest wooden house in the village. Although the house is stark and empty, he does have one possession of which he is very proud, a chainsaw, and apparently the largest one in the village. And then there is Drago, a dear friend who allowed me to follow him for the best part of a year as he tended to his vineyard. His relationship with his vineyard was especially touching, a kind of symbiotic one in which both he and the vineyard grew together. These are just some of the characters who populate these films. Gradually, while filming in the village, I learned 3 crucial things. Firstly, that stories belong to everyone and everyone tells them differently. Yet despite their differences, the crucial details would always remain intact. This is consistent with the nature of the oral tradition. Stories are living, breathing entities. They are passed down through the generations. They change over time, expand and contract, and there isn't a single definitive version of a story. Because of this, I was careful to film a story from multiple points of view, from the memories of several villagers. However it is told, the essence of a story would remain constant, while the additional details were simply an embellishment and usually reflected something about the person telling the story. In hearing these stories, I learnt too that there is actually no such thing as history as we understand the word. Each story is told. When it is told as if it were current affairs, as if the events were still living. But the third and most revealing thing I learnt was from Mika. He was to teach me possibly the most valuable lesson when it came to trying to understand the village.
За cijele Dražice, kad bi izvadili. Da. To mi ne moramo za mjesec dan izvaditi. Koliko ima priče o temu.
Da.
U Dražica su bile 2 kuće samo.
Ja. Pa svaki čovjek ima 100 priča.
Nema 100 priča. To je priča jedna u selu i gotovo. Nema 100 priča. To je u selu jedna priča.
And Mika is right. The village is better read, not as a collection of individual stories, but as a continuous narrative thread, woven from a great number of strands, as a conduit through which the history of the village is relayed. So when I started filming, I had no thought of where it would take me, but it started by chance when I asked Bakiela if she would show me around her home, a wooden house said to be the oldest in the village. 3 months later, she moved out to live with her daughter in a different village, and thus ended more than 80 years of occupation. I realized then how much the village was changing, and by talking to people just how much it had already changed within living memory. One of the clearest examples of this came after listening to stories of when people sold their cattle in order to buy a tractor in the 1980s. When we found the house 14 years ago, 4 families around us had a cow, now only 1. And when this one goes, a whole way of life will be lost with it. But let us walk on further.
Već smo razgovarali ja i ti o tome. Recimo, naše selo, Bukovlje, nije bilo kuće koja nije imala stoke. Dok su stariji članovi obitelji, roditelji, dede, bake, većinom ti ljudi bavili su se tim seoskim načinom života i preživljavali od toga. Nije bilo industrije, nisu bili zaposleni. Tek tamo početkom 70. godina došlo je do industrializacije. Kako je došlo do industrializacije, već je selo dobilo po repu. Volovi su prodani, pa su kupljeni traktori. Već su počeli prvi pokazatelji odumiranja sela.
Now we have arrived at the fireman's house, a large structure paid for and built by the villagers themselves. On the road here, the young men practice their firefighting routine, and on more than one occasion their skills and dedication has paid off. If we continue a little further, we will arrive at the cemetery. At night on All Saints' Day it looks so beautiful, with the candles and flowers, and this year a war memorial was unveiled after 21 years to the 6 people from Bukovlja who died during the Homeland War. 5 were active members of the army, and 1 young boy who had just taken his cow to the meadow when a grenade landed next to him in the field.
Tu imamo još i nažalost jednu civilnu žrtvu uz 5 hrvatskih branitelja. Imamo i civilnu žrtvu 12-godišnjeg dječaka koji je stradao u granatiranju područja tamo 1993. godine.
From up here we look to the other end of the village. Here you'll find a change in the village's geology. At one barely perceptible point, the number of beech trees and nettles diminishes, and instead birch trees and ferns grow where the soil becomes more sandy. The fields become more rolling and absent of the characteristic limestone found elsewhere. It is there that one can find the hunter's lodge, on the edge of a large forest. At 53, it is the oldest society in the village and takes its name, Brezatinac, from the word breza, meaning birch. Follow the road on and we pass some wonderful examples of wooden houses, abandoned long ago and sadly falling into decay, before we arrive at the school, a beautiful new building for just 7 or 8 pupils. This part of the village is known locally as Gai, and the school is a regular meeting place for the women of the cultural group Bukvice. These few women struggle to keep alive the art of embroidery and various other types of handicraft, and recently we all went together on a course to learn the art of weaving. Thanks to a recent donation, we were able to purchase our own loom, and now we include weaving as one of our skills. Beyond the school can be found the new chapel, before we ascend a steep hill and find ourselves in Kremin, from where stunning views around may be enjoyed. A final stretch through a wood brings us back to Tsari and our end of the village. Through using a video camera, I learnt about making documentaries. I taught myself to edit video footage and to compose accompanying music. The early films are somewhat crude, but nevertheless they capture some of the activities in the village that can no longer be seen. Nearly every day I would wander around the village with my camera, and I would accost anyone I came across for an interview or to let me record some anecdote. And as trust was established, people began to shed their inhibition. Among these films published online, there are a number of songs for which I composed the accompanying music. Here is Stjepan. There are very few people singing around the village now, and none with such vigour as Stjepan. It took me nearly a year to pin him down in front of a camera, and a bribe. Those of you who are curious, I should point out that that bottle of water is not water. It is a curious feature, but it tends to be tragic stories that endure and are remembered longer. 5 years ago, I interviewed 3 witnesses to an event around a village murder in the 1930s. They are all dead now, but in my film the story and their account to the events survive.
Da, moj otac je bio kao svirač i Mata Malović i Ivo Bilčić. Oni su svirali tu bila zabava u ovoj kući kad je ona drvena.
A kuća još postoji?
Stoji.
Je.
I to je bila kao bal neki, dječji ovako. Kod je bilo prije.
Da.
Nije to bilo zabava nekakva kod je danas. Te zabave i sve. Onda smo mi tamo bili kao derani.
Davno, ja sam bila curica. U školu sam tako išla, 1. i 2. razred. Pa sam s mamom išla gledat.
I bili ste u kući ili samo...
Nije, kuća bila do dana obiljena i uopće nije bilo, su i uobili ti čija bila kuća, to kad je bila zabava ta. A njega su iznesli na križanju, to te nije bilo ništa, posle su napravili mlin.
I vi ste to gledali na tom križanju?
Da, ležal je.
A vidjeli ste ga?
Da, ležal je na plati i pokrit.
Žalosno. Posle je mama i obolila. Mislim, nije to mogla podnesti. Morate si misliti kako je to strašno. Takve tragedije, Bože slobodi, komu se dogodi.
Thanks to our neighbour Torna, I was able to learn the dark art of distilling plums into rakia. It is a surprisingly easy form of alchemy.
Further down in the valley, Tihomir is already offering his own distillation to try.
Pola. Nema jasne sad moj.
And the verdict?
Dobra.
Despite the aging population, I filmed 2 village weddings, one in 2011 and the second 3 years later. I enjoyed watching the convoluted series of negotiations that first involve offering the groom an alternative bride for his consideration. Now, this character is known as the false bride, where the salad woman took the role for the first wedding.
Reluctant as Miro is to part with his daughter, he tries to persuade the groom to accept an alternative option.
While Valentino took the same role for the second. Of course, this option is politely refused, and so the negotiations continue.
Only after the prospect of offering some money do the 2 opposing parties find common ground. What is initially offered is not enough, of course, and the father's team appear offended by the ceremony. However, it is sufficient for the bride to show herself and grant a passage to the groom to cross through the barricade. One last standoff between opposing camps ensues, while the finer details of the agreement are ironed out. Before, much to everyone's relief, the match is made and everyone comes together. The festivities can now begin.
It was interesting to film both of these weddings and to see just how the procedure was almost identical.
But unlike as in previous times, the bride-to-be is no longer required to demonstrate her domestic skills by milking a cow. And neither does the groom have to prove his worth by chopping through the barricade with an axe. These days the barricade is simply carried away to allow the groom to enter and the festivities to begin.
There are many occasions in the village when people come together. Many are informal and impromptu, but others are well planned and are conducted with a little more decorum. In 2015, the village was honoured with a visit from Cardinal Bozanic. For the faithful in the village, it was clear just how much it meant to them.
Poštovani.
Važno je jer ovo je naše malo mjesto, njegov blagoslov, njegova riječ je puno znači tu, jer on je naš veliki čovjek, jel? Za našu kršćansku vjeru.
Religion plays an important role in the lives of the villagers, and even the agricultural calendar is informed by the various saints' days and religious holidays. Evidence of the church in Bukovlja goes back some 1,500 years. In 2012, excavation work in the village revealed a Bronze Age hill fort enclosing a 5th century church. It is an astonishing find, and it is said to be the oldest church ever found in the continental part of Croatia. Luckily, I've been around to film the archaeological work every year since they started digging.
Gore je crkva koja je netipična, znači nije žup, ne izgleda kao klasična župna crkva. Izgleda da je vrlo rana. A druga mogućnost koja nam se govori, evo ja ću sad reći, mogu je reći, postoji mogućnost da bi možda mogla biti. Zašto? Jer se radi o crkvi koja je tvrđava u isto vrijeme. Ali ne samo tvrđava sa zidovima debelim preko 2 metra, nego između ostalog ima i gospodarske zgrade. O tome, kako je Ana rekla, da se radi o kompleksu redovničkome. Sad, da li su to benediktinci ili su to možda čak Ivanovci, tako viteški red 1, to ćemo sad, za svašta postoje indicije, ali kako je rekao kolega Petar, teška muka slijedi kroz povijesne istraživanja, a nešto manja muka, ali fizički možda teža, slijedi idućih godina u arheološkim istraživanjima.
But even before the dig started, local people knew of the existence of this church. The legend concerning the fate of the bell is still being told.
The church, it is said, was a casualty of the Ottoman army, and stories abound concerning its bell. Was it melted down for Turkish cannons? Did it tumble into the dark depths of the river below, or does it continue to toll to this day in the nearby church of St. John?
I filmed the struggle to obtain water from the natural springs, or pumped from the river, and even today Bukovlja is still without running water.
Je li još uvijek selo koristi vodu iz
Da, no. Kad ovako prisuši, nema vode, onda svi idu na Zdenac po vodu.
Baš cijelo Bukovlje?
Da.
I onda na glavi vas?
Na glavi nosi, da. Škaf velik, da. Lako sam onda nosila da sam bila mlada, ne bi sada. Sad ne mogu ni 5 litar donesti, a prije sam 20 nosila.
I to je na glavi?
Da, je na glavi.
I filmed all manner of old legends, like this poem, which makes the claim that it was the river Mrežnica that saved Europe from the advancement of the Ottoman Empire.
Rekli ovako, da ne bjaše Mrežnice vode iz Večaja grada, sve bi Tursko do Metlike bilo. To nisi nikad zaboraviti.
And relatively new customs. Here is Drago once again. On this special day, he is dressed in his bishop's outfit, blessing the new wine, an event known as Martinja. Now, I believe this custom is largely known only in northern Croatia and Slovenia.
Hvaljeni Isus i Marija. Križamo se u ime Oca i Sina i Duha Svetoga. Amen. Dragi prijatelji i domaćine, pala mi je čast da održim tradicionalno krštenje mošta. Uz pomoć Svetog Martina, da se mošt pretvori u vino. Amen. Amen.
There are many Croatian communities across the globe, and somehow these films have reached them with astonishing results. Here we have Peggy Jasina, who, with her mother, had been searching for her family in Croatia for more than 20 years. But she will tell her story.
So, one night at home, everyone was busy doing something else, and I had a little pity party all for myself. And I said, okay, I will do some more genealogy work, and I typed Domšić into the computer. I meant to type it into the Google search engine, but I typed it into YouTube. And to my surprise, a series of lovely films came up with the tag underneath Domšić and a village named Bukovia. And I thought, okay, I'll watch. And I watched, I don't know which one I watched first, but I came to this film, The Village of the Dead, which is filmed in the cemetery. And I became more and more excited as I watched it, and I must have watched it for hours. And I ran and I got the family tree, and I would pause the video, the film, at one headstone, and I copied down all the information, and then I compared it, searching through the family tree, and back and forth and back and forth. I was so excited. I said, this might be the family. And I called my mother and I said, Mother, I found them. And we talked a bit, and I said, you can't imagine how excited I am. And she said, please don't stay up all night, which I did almost until 3 o'clock in the morning because I was so excited. And then the next day, a few days later, was when I messaged Andrew. And I said, I think you're filming my family. And then we began a correspondence back and forth. It's been an amazing thing, and I decided pretty shortly thereafter that I needed to come and see them because life is short and you never know what can happen, and I wanted to see them.
And who was her distant cousin? None other than Torna and the rest of the Domšić clan.
I feel like I know you from watching all the films.
I've seen each member of the family, and the visits, they just get better and better and better as the days go on, and I feel totally embraced. I feel like a member of the family.
When she returned to Bukovia, she came 120 years after her great-grandfather packed a bag and left for America in search of a better life. There are many people abroad who are interested in their family history. 5 years ago, an American genealogist by the name of Robert Yerin discovered my films. And now each year he brings parties of second, third or even fourth generation Croats to Croatia to research their genealogy. As part of their cultural tour around Croatia, he now includes a day in Bukovia. Here we entertain them with performance of music, followed by lunch. while visiting such destinations as Dubrovnik and Zagreb are essential, many have confessed that their visit to our village had a greater significance for them, for only in the village can they get a sense of how their forefathers once lived.
These experiences are deeply personal, but the understanding of their significance is something that the group as a whole can share, that feeling of belonging.
What are your impressions of the village here?
My impression is absolutely wonderful. I'm back home to my roots.
You feel that?
I do indeed. The first time we came to Croatia with my mother, we came home, I could not explain to my husband the feeling that I had when we got to the property that was my father's homeland.
I can get real emotional. But yeah, I belong here. You know, it's something that's part of me. You know.
So what does it mean for you to come to a village like this?
Just a wonderful experience. Just unbelievable. Very emotional.
Do you imagine it's like the villages of your ancestors?
And that's what I think of it as. Just unbelievable. I never thought I'd have the opportunity.
Yes, it is.
You're feeling at home in Croatia?
Yes, everything that I see in the people that were strongest in my family is played out in how these people.
Yeah. One cannot overestimate the importance to the individual of knowing where they came from. I open this lecture with a picture of a group of elderly ladies, of whom I like to call living museums. Bukovlia is still how I imagine England was 50 or more years ago, except that, unlike in England, where we can only read about village life and customs, in Bukovlia we are still fortunate to hear them and to see them firsthand. These are just some of the many stories from the village, and all these films are available to watch on this YouTube page. I hope you will enjoy them. Thank you very much. Do any of you know that part of the region? Karlovac, Zvečaj? You do?
I come from Dugaresa.
Okay.
So yeah, I grew up on the river, and I feel that I haven't been to Bukovlia, I have to admit. Now maybe this changes.
It's not that far from you, yes.
Yes,
yeah.
It's really not.
Lovely. Okay.
I just wanted to ask you how you choose actually the leading motif of your films. It's not just a personal story or life story of one particular person, but you always actually emphasize some motif or
I think the motive just suggests themselves. You know, if I'm talking with someone, they might start telling me a story which I might have heard from somebody else, and this is when I started putting the same version or different versions of the same story together, because there is no definitive version of a story. But I did one film called about people who drowned in the Mrežice, 100 years apart, and yet I got accounts from people who, of course, were not witnesses to it, from 3 people, and they all told it differently, but the kernel of the story was always the same. And what was revealed in the way they told the story was how much of their own personality they gave away. Some people would be much more, would start exaggerating details, and I found that really fascinating.
Thank you for the talk in the film. My question was regarding like environmental issues in the area, because you kind of hinted at it when you talked about like in a dry season, like in a drought season, that people are returning to the spring, or that there's no running water in the village, and you kind of hinted, of course, also at like depopulation, and mentioned like that in the past no one was employed, they lived from the land and their activities, but nowadays a lot of young people would move away from that village because of employment.
Well, this is true, they are. I mean, they laid water pipes nearly 5 years ago, and we still are not connected to the mains water. Personally, I don't mind it. I like the physical act of going to the natural spring to collect drinking water as much as I like chopping my own wood rather than just flicking a switch if I want heat.
But I mean, does the community have like environmental concerns, like about the quality of the water or quality of the soil? Like, I mean, having experienced like industrial revolution and chemical fertilizers and things like this, I mean, these
Well,
things
people
do
don't have
impact
really
agricultural
the money
resources.
to pay for chemical fertilizers. Maybe they will in the future. Now there is really no cattle left. You know, before there was a scene of one chap carrying a wagon full of manure. He sadly died. The cows have gone, and so fewer and fewer people actually working the land. It's becoming taken over with chicory and other spiky plants, which are not very pleasant. But no, I think people are more concerned about day-to-day living to think about really environmental concerns.
Okay.
Yeah. But for them, that's a bit of a luxury to think in those terms. Yeah.
And actually your role within community is also, how to say, you are a generator of new economic activities like cultural tourism.
Well, only when these Americans come. They've been coming every year now for about 12 years. And they really like it, but the population of the village is dwindling, and the band is getting smaller as well. So I don't know for how much longer they will still be coming. The women's culture group meet less and less these days.
I just wonder, those Americans, are they actually willing to invest something? Because I spent, as I said earlier, on the Ulganica village in Cres every summer, so there are lots of Americans who are visiting due to the relatives, blah, 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 and they invest a little bit, not much. So what is happening with those Americans who kind of find their roots in Bukovina?
Well, actually, they find their roots in Croatia, not in Bukovina. Only that one lady, Peggy, she had a direct contact with the village after 120 years, can you imagine? We have received donations from some Americans, particularly for the fire service, these essential, yes, yeah, and for the loom, which sadly no one is using. No one knows how to use it anymore. But I don't know what the future is.
Tourism?
Yes, but there were some lovely wooden houses, and they've been sold off. You know, dismantled and taken away. Yeah. There isn't really anywhere for people to stay unless they go to a bed and breakfast place, you know, around. We don't have such means in the village for that. Yeah.
Although there are some touristic apartments closer to.
Well, they're on the other side of the river. Yes, towards around Dugores area and in Zrečaj. Yeah.
How connected are the local people to the river? Would you say that it is still like a part of their identity? Are they somehow connected to the river, or is it just?
No, they're still very connected with it because that's where they get a lot of their water from. They take their tractors down for showering as well. And we have a deep Kiesnitzer, which we managed to collect enough rainwater to survive, to last us. Otherwise, we get a neighbour to fill it up for us. But no, the village is changing. I mean, it's dying basically, as all the villages around, away from towns.
There is no elementary school within the village?
There is a school, a beautiful new school. It's 15, 20 years old. But last time I saw, which was a couple of years ago, there are only about 8 pupils. And they all sit in one classroom, different age groups in one classroom. It is it's a beautiful building, but it's not very well used.
I saw like 250 inhabitants.
In total, so I think, yeah, something like that.
Approximately.
Yeah.
Some other comments or questions?
It was lovely to
Well,
it was lovely storytelling and
good, thank you.
kind of also nostalgia because I remember those scenes from visiting my uncle in Međimurje regions, cows, horses, field and so. Also in present time, village Lubenica and Zres, there is one inhabitant during the winter. So
yes. Well, when we moved there were 4 families around us that had cows. And then gradually they all went. Yeah. And the dew pond, because there are no cattle using it, cattle used to tamp down the bottom so the water would stay. And for the past few years, it's raining in the winter and early spring, filling up, and then the frogs get there and fill it up with frog spawn, and then the water drains away, and they don't finish that gestation period, which is about 9 to 12 weeks. So the frogs don't make it, unfortunately. And 2 years ago, I did put a nylon sheet down to try and keep the water there, but the water became stagnant. And I found a snake in there once, and that was the end of all the little tadpoles for that year. And I don't know what I'm going to do about this year. I think maybe just gather them up and take them down to the river, where they might have a better chance. Yeah.
Can you just say to us the name of your YouTube channel? It's on the...
It's Andrew Norris 2 is the village one, and Andrew Norris 1 is all my arts.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just put your name on.
Yeah.
That's how I found him.
Yeah.
So if there is no questions or comments, I gladly thank all of you for coming, and please keep on our Facebook also information for other lectures.
Just take a picture. We'd like to get in the picture. Thank you.